This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is May 20th, 2021, and this is episode 240.
I'm Scott Lunderboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, hotel employees laid off, on strike, locked out. What's happening? We'll talk to union representatives to find out what's been happening in the hotel sector as they struggle to survive the pandemic. And we dig into the candidates that are launching left, right, and center at every different level they're ready to run. First, as always, thank you to the 101 people who contribute to make this show happen every month. Support the podcast and join them at patreon.com/Politicoast. Politicoast is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicoast enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to politicstoday.news/free-trial. Joining me now on Politicos is Stephanie Fung, the communication specialist with Unite Here Local 40 Union here in Metro Vancouver. Welcome to the podcast. Stephanie, Unite Here has launched British Columbia's Unequal Women campaign to highlight some of the effects of this pandemic on women, and especially women in the workforce. Can you run us through the top line? What is this campaign about?
So the Unequal Women in BC campaign is a campaign that we've launched since March this year to call attention to the ways in which women in BC's hospitality industry are being impacted by the pandemic, specifically in the ways in which the hotel industry is using the pandemic as an excuse to get rid of their long-term workers and replace them with cheaper hires. A majority of these women who work in BC's hotels are racialized and they have large families. So this is really a disproportionate impact on these women who are bearing the brunt of this pandemic economically, socially, psychologically, and physically. And as Unite Here Local 40, we're calling on the community, we're calling on the public and our elected officials to take notice of what's happening to these women around the province who work at these hotels and who consider these hotel jobs their careers. They've been working at these hotels for decades and they're not going to stay silent, which is why women across the province are fighting back to save their jobs and are calling on their hotels to guarantee that they have a right to return to their jobs once the pandemic is over and business returns.
Tell me a little bit about your union. I assume you represent quite a few people. You have members at Pan Pacific, Vancouver, Coast Hotels, Hilton, Metrotown, Pacific Gateway Hotel. These are large institutions.
Exactly. So our union is BC's Union for Hospitality Workers. We represent hotels, food services, airport and gaming industries throughout the province. And yes, our members come from Pan Pacific, major downtown hotels in Vancouver and in other cities in the province as well. And it is a diverse membership. A lot of them are immigrants, women from First Nations communities. And so a lot of these workers also have housekeeping jobs, and some of them are servers, bartenders, they work in restaurants, and a majority of them serve the public.
And so at the start of the pandemic, we all remember that point just over a year ago where everything was shutting down, travel restrictions were coming into place, people were really told to stay home, and that all made sense. Undoubtedly, we all know that hit the tourism sector very hard. Your website talks about 50,000 hotel workers being laid off across the province. Not even really a question, that just sucks. How were your people able to make do in the short term with that situation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That number is a tremendous number, and it was really devastating when the pandemic struck last March. 50,000 hotel workers, and that's not just 50,000, that's including their families. And for these workers to be all laid off, that was the first impact. And then once workers realized these layoffs could happen for a long period, then they realized this is just, it's a crisis that's happening to hotel workers across BC. Yeah, so when 50,000 hotel workers were laid off when the pandemic struck, and that was just the first hit. But when the hotel industry began mass firings of hotel workers last summer, workers were extremely devastated, but they were also very angry and decided to take their fight to the province to say, why are our hotels trying to mass fire us during a pandemic? No one should be losing their job because of a temporary health crisis. Like, we know that the pandemic is going to be over. The economy is going to come back. Business will come back, and workers should have their jobs back. So why isn't the government stepping in to protect workers during this time? And immediately last summer, workers took their fight to the BC legislature, and they fasted for their jobs on the lawn. They fasted, I believe, for a little over a month. But ultimately, the government failed to protect workers who just want a right to return to their jobs when the industry recovers.
So that was last spring. Following that, I imagine many of the layoffs happened. They became more permanent, like you talked about. As we come into the new year, we've seen more and more of these permanent layoffs, these lockouts. What kind of job actions has the union been staging to try to protest this?
Right after when the provincial government said that they weren't going to step in and intervene to legislate recall rights for hotel workers, we've been taking our fight to the hotel industry instead, where hotels have continued to permanently lay off their workers. And so hotel workers are fighting and going on strike. They're demonstrating outside of their hotels, setting picket lines to urge hotel customers not to give business to hotels that are mass firing their women.
Has any of that been successful? Are there any good news stories out of this yet?
There has been some good news stories. The community has been very supportive. As an example, Hilton Metrotown and Pacific Gateway Hotel, where they eliminated a large part of their workforce. Many of these customers and community groups, and of course our brothers and sisters in other unions, they've been extremely supportive of hotel workers and have pledged not to patronize these hotels and are publicly calling on these hotels to do the right thing and bring women back to their jobs. Furthermore, the BC Federation of Labor recently issued a public boycott calling on all unions and calling on the public in the province to boycott the Hilton Metrotown and Pacific Gateway Hotel.
Yeah, I'm reading. There's been a good amount of coverage of the Hilton story in Burnaby Now and a few other places. They laid off 97 employees there and tried to avoid paying out severance even. But they just this week actually lost the arbitration settlement. And it sounds like those employees are at least going to get some settlement out of that, hopefully.
Right. Yeah. This issue, the decision that was made, it actually has implications for the broader hotel industry. So what Hilton Metrotown was trying to do was skirt their severance obligation. They were trying to use the pandemic to make an excuse and say that they didn't have enough money to pay larger severance payouts to their fired workers. But the arbitrator said, look, Hilton Metrotown, your hotel is still open, which means business is still running. And this doesn't make any sense. If you're still operating and employing people, it's not impossible for you to comply with your obligations to perform your employment contracts. So ultimately, the fired workers are receiving larger severance payouts right now. And we consider that a victory. It just tells all these other hotels that you can't try and use the pandemic as an excuse to avoid paying severance to your fired workers.
It is good to have some of those little victories to at least uphold the labor standards we have in the province, even if we're not able to see new victories like the ones you were campaigning for last year. At the same time, there has been some announcements by the provincial and the federal government to provide support to the tourism sector. I think there was some announcements about money to anchor attractions this week, and there's been announcements about bailouts to the tourism sector. Has any of that money, I hate to use the phrase, but trickled down to workers?
This is the most, it's really outrageous how the hotel industry is receiving bailout money. I know, and in April, $120 million was given to aid the recovery of the tourism sector, as well as $25 million in circuit breaker grants. But none of this is trickling down to workers, and there is no stipulation that says that any business that receives this bailout money or these grants are required to bring their workers back to their jobs. And that's the most outrageous, or just the most ridiculous thing that happens. That can't happen. And that's why we're trying to ask the government to implement some legislation to ensure that any hotel or any business that receives bailout money has to guarantee that their laid off workers are able to return to their jobs.
I have to assume that many of these hotels have also applied for like the emergency wage subsidy. We've seen that go to a lot of major corporations who don't necessarily keep their employees on, frustratingly.
Exactly. Yes, very few of these hotels have actually taken the opportunity to participate in the wage subsidy programs. And when they do, it's not even clear whether workers are going to benefit.
What are you asking members of the public to do? I know hotel unions have clear asks of their members and of management and of government, but the BC Unequal Women campaign has a travel alert out, it looks like.
Yes, what we're asking the public to do is to not stay at hotels that use the pandemic to roll back the clock on women's economic security. And we have a large list on our website currently at bcunequalwomen.org that lists the hotels that are threatening to eliminate their workforce and who have already fired their workers. Hilton, Metrotown, and Pacific Gateway are on the top of the list. And we also have a list that shows that the hotels who have agreed to bring back the workforce to their jobs when the pandemic is over.
That's a much shorter list. It's only 4 places.
Exactly. But we're fighting to make sure that all these other hotels eventually agree to return workers to their jobs.
All right. Stephanie Fung, is there anything I didn't ask you or anything else you want to mention about your campaign and the work that your union is doing right now?
I just want to say that other ways the public can support is to write letters to these hotels to ask them to do the right thing and bring their women back to their jobs. We're also having actions every Thursday in front of the Hilton Metrotown and Pacific Gateway Hotel. If you want to support workers on the picket line, you're more than welcome to join us. Workers are picketing every day outside the Hilton and Pacific Gateway Hotel. But we have all these community actions happening every Thursday.
All right. Thank you for taking the time this morning.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's jump into the candidates taking off. The big news to start the week, I think, is the Kevin Falcon BC Liberal leadership race, long expected, has officially started. I didn't intend it as one. As I was trying to introduce the segment, I was thinking I was missing puns, but if I squeezed one in accidentally, I'll go for it.
Yeah. I think I was joking before. We should have called this segment Falcon and the Winter Voter, but we'll what we got. So yeah, Kevin Falcon, the widely rumored, I think worst kept secret in the province, has finally announced his campaign. He'd been organizing in the background for several months now, building a campaign team, and finally rolled it out this week.
So Kevin Falcon, who's been involved in politics in BC for a long time, since the Socreds in the 80s. He was first elected in 2001 in the big BC Liberal wave. He represented Surrey Cloverdale. He was re-elected in 2005 and 2009. He first joined cabinet as the Minister of State for Deregulation. And he was known
for the BC Liberal government.
Yeah, he got a lot of kudos for cutting red tape. Following the BC rail investigations, he replaced Judith Reid as Minister of Transport and Infrastructure. There, he changed the governance of TransLink, reducing municipal oversight. He introduced the Gateway program, a $3 billion regional transit strategy, and he helped launch the construction of the new Port Mann Bridge. In 2009, he made his way over to the Ministry of Health, approving the expansion of Surrey Memorial Hospital and really pursuing those P4P, pay for performance funding models, as well as shared public-private partnerships. Later, he went on to be the Minister of Finance, I think his most prominent role, and Deputy Premier under Christy Clark, who he did not defeat in the leadership contest he last ran in.
Yeah, so altogether a fairly long political resume here in BC that has some benefits and downsides. Means he's well connected in the party, but also there is going to be a few things that no doubt the NDP Oppo team is already leafily digging through.
Yeah, Falcon's viewed on the more conservative side of the BC Liberals. It was rumored that following his previous failed bid, a number of his supporters went to the BC Conservatives and tried to cause some trouble for the party then. Didn't ultimately pan out, but there was that brief period, I think around 2012, when the BC Liberal ship looked like it was going to go down in 2013, and then Christy Clark pulled it off. So the question does come back. Does the baggage of those years in government harm Falcon's chance now? Is he too conservative for where the party and the province are now? Or does he have a new way of making the old new again?
I don't think he's too conservative for the party. That, if anything, I think has drifted further away from its small L liberal roots. It as the brokerage party for the center to the right. And particularly with where the Liberals have managed to hold on post-2020 election, he seems well suited to appeal to that group. I don't think he's going to have problems winning over people in the party generally. I think there's going to be some concerns for people, my general outlook, that think the BC Liberals need to focus quite a bit on winning back Metro Vancouver as their path to victory. Those people might have a harder sell, but probably not the majority of the people actually voting in the leadership race. Where it does get a bit tricky, I think, is how do things go in the next election in 2024? And that is where I could see those issues start to have some more challenges.
Yeah, Falcon, for his part, has used his leadership bid to try to position I want to take control and redirect the party. He's even pitched his flag on the change the name banner, as it were. I don't know what he wants to change it to, but that can be the next challenge for Falcon if he does win.
I'm going to guess they're going to go with the name it after the province route, like the Sask party.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been used before. I think they might be able to get away with it. There's a lot of combinations of First BC First and all that have been used, but he might be able to get away with the British Columbia Party.
Yeah, I also don't know if the election BC rules on it are. There may actually be a limit as one of the various rules on what parties can call themselves.
He also talked a lot about refreshing the party, though. He talked a lot about the importance of diversity for his part, not just gender and racial. He wants to make sure it's a party welcoming to people of all sexual orientations, gender identities, really trying to, I think, push away from some of the scandals that weighed them down under the Wilkinson years, where I think there was a desire to move that way, but an inability to. Policy-wise, though, we don't quite know what he would pitch. He has talked about the importance of making it a principles-based party, whatever that means.
I think that's definitely going to be something we'll see how that shakes out in the coming months. Just going briefly back to the name thing, I am thoroughly unconvinced of the benefits of renaming the BC Liberal Party. Yeah, it's a party that's had some challenges and its brand isn't particularly strong now, but the problems, I think, go deeper than that. And more specifically, I think the branding challenges generally reflects the problems the party's having more so than the other way around. Thinking back, 10 years ago now, there was serious talk about whether the Liberal Party of Canada brand was permanently dead and whether or not they needed to completely change everything. And, well, now if the polls are to be believed, they're on track for their third straight election win. Parties can go through slumps. They can have times where their brand isn't all that resonant. The NDP had that for, most of the time Kevin Falcon was an elected politician, and now they're in a pretty strong spot. I don't think the name actually matters that much compared to having the other reasons why the party exists, why it's running, what its raison d'etre is. And if they can figure that out, ultimately I think the challenges with the name will more or less go away.
I can see if he does bring about a successful refocus on updated principles. It'd be nice to have those written down so we could debate the value of them. But instead, for now, he's just talking about the need for new principles or going back to principles or something. From there, you can use a new name as a relaunch type situation, maybe.
Yeah. This is the thing where people like us want to dive deep into the policy and figure out exactly what they're. But unfortunately, campaigns don't exactly work to our schedule on this one. So
hey, I'd be happy to even just talk about what principles he wants to run on. But speaking of things we're still talking about, Kevin Falcon's already run into a bit of a rocky start to his campaign in week one. He was being interviewed by Mike Smith earlier this week and was asked about some events from ancient history back in the 2020 election. Do you want to run us through the story?
Yeah, so this is related to the infamous Liberal Party Zoom call for the retirement of Ralph Salton, the, at the time, outgoing member of the Legislative Assembly for West Vancouver. And as listeners no doubt remember, there were some comments made around NDP MLA Bowen Ma. Falcon was on the call, was asked if he should apologize for his part in that. He decided not to, and instead came up with a somewhat awkward defense of not really need. It was inappropriate, but there wasn't really an apology owed.
Yeah, it was weird. It was a lot of words used to not bury the issue, and it came up again in a second interview the next day, I think with Brent Minier or someone else. And so in the video, he's seen laughing along to Jane Thornthwaite, who's the one who made the comments that she later apologized for and the party has later apologized for. And Falcon was asked, Andrew Wilkinson apologized. Why won't you apologize for laughing along? And it was one of those awkward situations where you don't know where the joke's going, so you're just politely laughing along. And back then it was during the election campaign, so of course there's politics involved, and you're in a leadership campaign now. Are there not politics involved here? It was weird to not just try to go, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean any offense to Bowen Ma. I respect her as a politician and what she goes through. Something like that. And just bury it and move on.
Exactly. It could have been the softest apology possible, and it just would not have become an issue, but that's not how it played out, and he got, a weekish? No, maybe not a week, but a couple of days of that being the story of his leadership race, which isn't great.
Not great on the first week, which is the week you want to be about. Well, to be about you, but to be about the good things about you.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a long race. I do not think this is going to be a discussion come January and February and the voting's actually taking place. Nor will it be an item, 3.5 years from now when the next election is, presuming he wins the leadership race.
And hey, maybe Falcon has just been out of politics so long that he's forgotten how to play the game. So a rocky start, but we'll keep our eye on his campaign. The other place we're keeping our eye on is on the Michael Lee Twitter account, because he tweeted out a cryptic video this week of him running in the forest that just says "ready to run" and breathing very heavily into the microphone.
So this is his announcement that he's going to be participating in the next marathon, right?
Yeah, I think it's the Scotiabank Half is the next one coming up. The BMO just happened, so that must be what he's doing. That, or he's going to scale the grouse grind in record time. That helped Justin Trudeau win, didn't it?
I'm not sure how many votes can be directly attributed to that little endeavor, but yeah, it's super cryptic. I'd honestly forgotten Michael Lee was thinking of throwing his hat in the ring at this point. He's been rather quiet of late, with the exception of this video. It's worth noting he did run last time. Finished fairly respectively, but I like Michael Lee, but I haven't seen a huge amount out of him in the past year or so that's really indicated where he wants to go with things.
Yeah, he and Andrew Wilkinson were the two BC Liberals to hold on to their seats in the city of Vancouver, and one of very few to hold on to their seats in Metro Vancouver. He managed to hold 1,400 votes over Tessica Truong of the NDP, who posted a respectable vote share in the 2020 election, but it didn't come down. He managed to hold on. It would be good, as we've talked about, for the party to have someone from Vancouver, although Wilkinson was from Vancouver and that didn't help them. So I'm curious to see what he brings to the race this time to shake it up. And it's not just people seeking the leadership of the BC Liberal Party that are announcing their intentions to seek public office. We also have a few federal candidates here in BC who are seeking party nominations, trying to unseat rivals in a couple interesting ridings. Let's start with the probably bigger one, Avi Lewis in West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky country.
Yeah, this was announced earlier this week to, I think, everyone's befuddlement. Avi Lewis is longtime NDP activist. The family's about as close to NDP royalty as there can be. So, very well connected in the party, but he chose West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky. There needs to be a shorter name for that riding. He chose to run there with the NDP finished fourth last time and has never finished above 25% of the vote. Even in the wave year of 2011, they were only, just pulling up here.
It was a little bit weird because the riding didn't exist in 2011. It was a slightly different one, but the closest riding they were second.
Yeah, it's kind of predecessor-ish riding. Not exactly an NDP stronghold or even a competitive NDP race, which I think left everybody going, after the announcement. And like I said, Avi Lewis is no stranger to politics, and he has access to the NDP strategists and all of those people, so he must know this is not a likely win. The Liberals are in a good position just generally. There's no reason to think that he's going to be able to pick off the Liberal MP there at all. So the only thing I can conclude from this is that he wants to be seen to run, but not actually be an MP.
So I'll start with the official reason, then talk about Avi, and then we can come back to the strategy of this. Avi has said he's running in West Vancouver, blah, 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 because that's where he and his partner Naomi Klein are living these days. I guess they moved from, I think it was Toronto, to the Sunshine Coast recently, and are establishing roots. So there is some value there in terms of the connection. He does seem like the kind who's going to hit the ground hard, although initially some of his campaign is targeted pretty broadly. Let's talk about Avi Lewis himself for a second. You talk about him as NDP royalty, and just to put that in context, his father, Stephen Lewis, was the leader of the Ontario NDP for a good 7 years in the 70s and became quite the prominent diplomat and widely respected, like one of the few senior personalities of the NDP in Canada. Him and like Ed Broadbent were the like last two. Avi Lewis, as I mentioned, is married to Naomi Klein, the writer and activist many have known. Naomi Klein's brother is Seth Klein, who we've had on this podcast. Seth Klein is married to Christine Boyle, City of Vancouver councillor for One City Vancouver. So it's not the most not incestuous, but like political family in Canada, but it's up there in terms of just at every level across the country in many ways, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's just like an interesting thing to note. Avi himself is a documentary filmmaker, has done work for a number of different journalism outfits, and he and Naomi Klein and a few others were most notable for launching the LEAP manifesto, and they did that outside the partisan structures, but it was largely seen as a push on the NDP and the Greens.
Oh, reading the thing, it was clearly written for an NDP audience.
I'm sure they wouldn't have complained if the Conservatives adopted it, but it wasn't going to happen. So,
yeah, I think they wanted to abolish the military in there. There was some wacky stuff in there that I don't think had any appeal outside of the NDP circles and the more radical half of that.
West Vancouver is an interesting area for the NDP to run. In 2015, it looks like they didn't spend any money and got just under 10% of the vote. In 2019, the candidate, who neither of these candidates have Wikipedia pages, spent $5,000 and got 14% of the vote. The Greens did overshoot them in 2019, spending $60,000. So you can imagine if a prominent Green New Democrat like Avi Lewis is running there in 2021, 2022, and puts in a full campaign, he can pull more votes, right? He'll be able to probably pull at least 5 to 10 more, maybe bringing them back to that rough 2011 number, which is about 23. Maybe they can make it a three-way race, is the hope, I think. If they can peel off a few Liberals, the Conservatives take about a quarter of that seat, it seems like, consistently. So it's not impossible for the NDP to do okay there, but it's not the easy one.
Yeah, outside of a Liberal collapse federally, that would happen all of a sudden. A stronger showing from the Conservatives than we've seen, and a very solid push to collect a bunch of those Green votes. I have a hard time seeing how this even just gets into the competitive range. Like, a good candidate can probably, on the outside edge, maybe net an extra 5, very rarely maybe 10, but like it's such an uphill battle here that I just do not see this as a particularly viable path for getting into Parliament, especially when, like you said, he's from Toronto. If he wants to run, he has an area that is generally more NDP friendly, where he has more connections to, that he could run in if he wanted to.
The current MP for West Vancouver is a Liberal, Patrick Weiler, who was first elected in 2019, so he's only partway through his first term. His father's a UBC law professor, his mother's a former Sechelt municipal councillor, and he was born and raised in West Vancouver, so he does have some connections, deep connections to the constituency. That said, I'd never heard of the guy. I couldn't have named him beforehand. I don't know how much he's challenged or how much he's accomplished federally.
To be fair, I don't think most people who don't pay attention to politics could have named Avi Lewis either. Neither of these people are household names. Just one of them, I think, in our circles is maybe a slightly more well-known name. Anyway, we'll have to keep an eye on that one because it is one of the more interesting candidate announcements we've seen in a while.
And it's a vote of confidence probably to Jagmeet Singh to have Lewis actually step up and put his name on a ballot rather than just yell about politics from the outside.
Maybe, for all we know, he could be setting himself up for something else in the future, and he wants to at least have one campaign under his belt before challenging Jagmeet in a leadership race after the NDP inevitably lose the next election.
Let's talk finally about the Green who wants to unseat the safe New Democrat. This is Dr. Lisa Gunderson in Esquimalt, Saanich Suk, speaking of long-named constituencies, who announced her candidacy for the federal Greens this week. Randall Garrison has been the New Democrat in Esquimalt since 2011 as well. He's the party's critic for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender issues, succeeding it from Bill 6A, who held the constituency, has supported a lot of queer rights federally. I also know, though, a lot of the more activist base in the NDP have not been as keen on Garrison, finding him to be a bit more of the moderate in the party. I think he takes a bit more of the moderate stance on issues like Israel than many have wanted the party to take, or that they've even started to take. So I have seen criticism and a desire for him to be moved out. And
at the same time, though, it's worth remembering Keith Martin generally represented this area, and he has a Reform and Liberal Party background. I don't think, and just generally knowing the little bit I do of the Western communities in Victoria, I don't think there's a clamoring for someone who is more radical than Randall Garrison to represent them. So, well, the NDP activist base may not be super stoked with him. I don't think I don't think electorally that's going to be realized anytime soon.
Okay, but do you know who was the MP before Keith Martin from 1988 to 1993?
Not off the top of my head.
It was Dave Barrett, former Premier of BC. He held it for 3 years. Yeah, like you said, Keith Martin was first elected in 93 as a Reform member. Then he switched to the Canadian Alliance. He refused to join the Conservative Party of Canada. As you can hear, Rugen has joined me because I forgot to close the door to my new place I can record. Welcome back, Kat. Martin, didn't want to join the federal Conservatives, though, after being in the Reform, and decided to switch to the Liberals from 2004 to 2011. I guess he was economically conservative, but socially liberal, but fine being in the Reform Party. Interesting characters.
The 90s were an interesting time.
So Dr. Lisa Gunderson for the Green Party is a community leader, business owner, and psychologist who lives in the riding. A Black woman who looks like she's spoken a lot who's tried to stand up for social and racial justice in the environment. Someone I've not heard of. The Greens, however, have been growing their vote, especially in Victoria and BC. In 2015, they had just under 20% of the vote in this constituency. In 2019, that had grown to 26% of the vote, with a full campaign fund in both of those races. It's 8 points back from where Garrison was, but if I'm the Green Party looking for a breakthrough in the next election, this is probably pretty high on my list to target.
Yeah, in general, the political real estate, geographically speaking, that the Green Party is likely to succeed in is the South Island. They have 2 seats there already. The other seat they have out in Fredericton, that they'll maybe hold it, probably. It's their first time winning that one, but it's not like there's a huge amount of other likely New Brunswick pickups for them. So in terms of where they get their 4th seat from, focusing in on the South Island, there's a couple ridings. This is not the only one where the Greens finished second. I think the neighboring riding in Victoria had the Greens finish second in. Let me just pull up the actual results here. And it also actually, part of the riding was formerly in Saanich Gulf Islands. It just makes a huge amount of sense to put the focus in on the kind of Nanaimo down to the tip of the island area for them. So, yeah, put the effort into that because that's where they're likely to pick up a seat.
In any case, we see a lot of races shaping up where it's going to be the NDP versus the Greens, which must be to the Liberal and Conservative delights, because then they can both pursue at least a plurality of the seats. Might still be a little hard to get to the majority situation, though.
Well, moving on to what takes. Quebec and the Constitution has been opened up again, or there's at least discussion of that, as Quebec has introduced Bill 96. This is their latest package of language reforms. I don't think it's worth going into all the particulars there, but basically it adds a bunch of rules and extends what they say is protections to the French language. But most interestingly is a provision in there to amend the Constitution to give Quebec a status as a nation, as well as, what's the second one? Sorry.
To make Quebec's only official language be French. So these are buried within a pretty large and complex bill. And like you say, we're not going to get into it because it did drop a couple weeks ago, but it's quite outside our remit and we haven't followed it too closely. But this week, there was first a piece in CBC and then a Tristan Hopper piece in the National Post and some more fringe commentary on this that I think all evolved out of Emmett McFarland tweeting about it.
Emmett McFarland also wrote a piece in Policy Options.
Okay.
So this isn't just the Emmett McFarland tweets, although he's a good follow on Twitter. But
most of the time, but I feel like this time he's just yelling about something that doesn't need to be yelled about. So what's happening is basically Quebec is saying, we want to add these two lines to the Constitution of Canada. Yes, the one that we never change or allegedly never change, which actually isn't true. There have been a couple changes to the federal constitution. They just are ones that only affect individual provinces. For example, New Brunswick had a change in its own language treatment, and Newfoundland had a change in the 90s as well to its requirement to provide religious schooling. So they asked for a bilateral agreement with the federal government so that they didn't have to do that anymore.
I think they also formally changed the name to add "and Labrador" to it as well. So yeah, the Constitution has a couple different mechanisms for amendment. I think the one that's most commonly known is the 750 formula, basically for significant but not massive changes to the Constitution. Generally requires the federal parliament plus 7 legislatures representing at least 50% of the Canadian population to amend the Constitution. There's also some provisions around very foundational bits, such as removing the monarchy, for example, that would require a unanimous consent of all provinces. But for sections that only affect a single province, generally the rule is that the province and the federal parliament together can make amendments.
So the question here is, does Quebec declaring itself a nation affect anyone else? The language thing I don't think does.
I don't think the nation thing particularly affects anything. Like, it's worth remembering that, 2006, I think, that the Harper government declared Quebec a nation. It's basically been the de facto policy of Canada for quite a few years now. Where the real sticking point seems to be whether or not you even need the federal parliament to participate in it. I don't think anyone's really arguing that this requires the 750 rule to come into effect. It's more the question of whether it requires the federal government at all. And Trudeau earlier this week, I think, said no, which I think raised a few eyebrows among McFarlane and others.
I guess we'll find out the answer to that question as the federal government does its own review a little more thoroughly. I think there was some Wexit type people who were like, now Alberta could opt itself out of equalization. And that does affect other people, though.
I don't think
you don't understand how equalization works.
It's not even the Wexit. That was just, I think, a fairly common thing from quite a few Alberta MPs or MLAs. We're saying that. But yeah, that absolutely would be a change that would require the 750 rules. Now, interestingly, something I learned in all this is that there are also provincial constitutions, which basically nobody ever talks about, and that there's also a procedure under, Section 45 that allows just a provincial government to simply amend their own constitution, which is how this is arguably going to be put forward, which I think you could argue on the language thing makes sense, but the is it a nation thing is questionably a little more a matter of federal policy as well.
Yeah, interesting bit of constitutional minutia. I still feel like it's being largely overblown relative to substantive changes. These are really feel like making Quebec's only official language be French.
That's been the de facto policy.
That is how it is anyway. So
yeah, in fact,
they're ceremonial changes.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm no constitutional expert, but the little bit I have gleaned from reading up on this stuff before we started recording was that the provincial constitutions, such as they exist, and BC is the only one that actually has anything approaching a written document on the matter. Everything else is just a hodgepodge of convention and just regular statutes. Is that if the provincial governments can basically just amend those as a simple bill, and in practice, is it really so much a constitution as just another statute that specifically describes the nature of government in that place? To me, it would seem like a constitution would have to be something that is one step removed from just simple legislation. And that, for as far as I can tell in my very brief gleaning of this, is practically speaking, that seems to not be a major distinction here. So it really just seems like a whole lot of nothing when it comes to the question of provincial constitutions. Now, if this would be an amendment to the Constitution Act of 1867, that I think there is actually some pretty reasonable concern over the unilateral amendments by Quebec. Like we said, the province and the feds can get together for things that affect a single province and bring that in, no problems. But if it doesn't even require federal sign-off to amend the federal constitution, that does seem more than a little sketchy and questionable, and it would be nice if Trudeau was at least a little more clear on that and willing to reserve the federal government's right to be part of the amendment process where the federal constitution is concerned.
Well, one place the federal government is willing to make changes unilaterally is in leadership of the armed forces in this country, as we've seen. The latest, at least after it seems sometimes too much time has gone by. The latest senior ranking official to lose a post is Major General Danny Fortin, who was, up until this past week, the head of Canada's COVID response or vaccine distribution. I forget the exact role.
It was the vaccine distribution and logistics.
There has been a new military probe into, or there's been a military probe into sexual misconduct claims against him, and those have now been referred to Crown prosecutors to decide whether to pursue criminal charges. These allegations relate to incidents before 2015 and the Operation Honor campaign that was supposed to stamp out sexual misconduct in the military, but really just another black mark on Canada's military and another round of questions of who knew what when in the political circles.
So yeah, not a great day for the Canadian Forces, who clearly still have a lot of work to do in this area. Replacements already being appointed, and it shouldn't affect the continued rollout of the vaccines across Canada. If there's one thing the military is good at, it's generally being able to change out leadership roles as needed and have someone step in and assume command. But yeah, I don't really have anything more to say on it. It's not good. Hopefully this matter gets resolved in an appropriate way that sees justice served, whatever version, or whatever that ends up being. And that has been Playtoast. Find links to everything we talked about at playtoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our Slack channel at patreon.com/playtoast. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikoff. Playtoast is a production of Legend Boot Media, and editing services are provided by CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Wash your hands and stay home. Thanks for listening.